My wife's son attempted self-harm and said his mother was abusing him. What should I do? So, my family life is a mess, to put it lightly, and I'm not innocent of that. My wife and I grew apart while our daughters were in their preteens or early teens. We never really talked about it in detail, but I think we both knew that we were staying together for the kids. She once said, while we were fighting, that she couldn't wait for our youngest to leave home so we could divorce. Then she came home pregnant with another kid, years after the last time we'd been intimate. I honestly should have divorced her. I regret not doing it now. The truth is, I didn't want to bring that messiness into my relationships with my daughters, and even once they moved out, I was comfortable just not being home a lot. I have other places I can be, and fewer chores and no alimony and child support kind of felt like it was worth the fighting. Or at least close enough to worth it that I wasn't eager to go through the divorce process. We're basically roommates who wear wedding rings and yell at each other. I'll also admit that I didn't get to know my wife's son very well. It always felt like he was her thing. I just looked after him when she asked me to. He's not a very endearing kid. Quiet, grumpy, weird, used to take apart every device he could get his hands on, not very well behaved in general. Anyhow, this weekend, I found out that he's been suffering. I wanted to go fishing, and the wife wanted to not have to deal with him, so I took him with me. He insisted on wearing a hoodie even though it was hot, and I took it off him when he started showing signs of heat stroke and still wanted to keep it on. That's how I ended up seeing the scars on his wrist. There's only a couple, and they're fairly fresh. I was pretty shook up by that. At first, he wouldn't tell me anything. Maybe 20 or 30 minutes later, he really spilled guts on me. He has no friends, the other kids pick on him, typical kid stuff. And then he goes on about what my wife said to him. She said that he's an embarrassment, that she wishes he'd never been born so she could have run away with her affair partner, that he's the reason she lost her job, that he'll never amount to anything like his sisters did, that there's a reason the other kids pick on him, and so on. She insults everything he likes just to hurt him, and she mocks him for showing sadness. He hates seeing us interact with his half-sisters because he knows he'll never have anything like that. I don't know what he meant. He wishes he could just never feel anything again. So, I held the kid and told him that none of that was true, that I'd talk to her, and that I'd make sure something would change. I haven't. I don't know how, and I know it's going to be a bloody mess when I do. I tried to talk to her son again, but he's not interested in talking. He says he made a mistake because of the heat, and that he's fine and should just forget about it. I don't know what to do for this kid. I'm scared that he'll end himself unless something is done. Aside from the self-harm, he just comes off as really emotionally unalive. TLDR, my wife's son is miserable, and I don't know what to do about it. Update. For those who didn't read the first post, here's the situation as of a month ago. I was disengaged from my family. I had fallen out of love with my wife years ago and was putting off divorce for no real reason. She had a child with someone else, and I had little involvement with the child because all three of us thought of him as exclusively hers. I was not spending much time at home in general due to feeling ill at ease there due to frequent arguments. Then, I found out that the child was doing very badly. His mother was verbally abusing him, he was friendless and bullied, and he was self-harming. This was shocking to me, and I sought advice on Reddit as to how to help him. Here's what happened after the first post. I served my wife the divorce papers within a week of him telling me about the abuse, having made a decision to raise him myself. There was screaming, name-calling, and blaming going both directions and a massive fight over who should leave, but in the end she packed her bags and left. I went to my son to tell him that I'd divorced her because I didn't want to be with someone who treated a kid so badly, and that she wouldn't be living with us anymore. He said, okay. I asked him how he felt about that, and he shrugged. The divorce itself is looking like it's going to be as much of a financial and practical nightmare as I imagined it, but she didn't want custody of our son, so that won't be a fight. Emotionally, the divorce makes me feel nothing. I was angry at first, but I feel at home in my own house for the first time in years. It's definitely worth it. I have tried to talk to my ex-wife about our son, but she says it's not her problem anymore. I have a feeling that we will talk almost exclusively about legal matters in the future. As for how my son is doing, well, I guess things are improving. I contacted a child psychologist, and while there was a bit of a waiting list, he's going to start therapy in 2 weeks. He also finished the 7th grade, and I found out that he has really high marks, like high 90s in every class but gym. As well, he's going to high school next year, and I'm letting him choose the school. He's choosing one away from his old peer group, unsurprisingly. Unsurprisingly, given how little time has passed and the state he was in to begin with, he's pretty maladjusted. He's understandably very upset about not seeing his mother anymore. He hasn't said as much, but my guess is that he still loved his mom even though she was abusing him. He also has some antisocial views, which I'll get to later. But We've had a few good times. One of the Redditors here suggested that we get some old electronics and take them apart together. And we had a great time doing that. He's also introduced me to his video games. And he likes rambling about things and researching things. Aside from machines and his games, he knows more about genetics than I do. He's actually pretty cool. The antisocial views. I got him into this STEM club and asked him if he was talking to anyone there after his first meeting. He said no, he doesn't need friends. We talked about what he meant, and he made some weird comments about how he didn't need anyone's love or kindness. I was tempted to remind him that he'd cried over the lack of those things to me 2 weeks ago, but I didn't. I don't know what to do with him thinking like that, but it doesn't seem healthy. I want him to make friends. I asked him recently if he's doing better than he was a month ago. He said yes. I know it's going to be an uphill battle to unf this kid, but I think it's going okay so far. Any suggestions? TLDR, he's away from his mother. I'm doing my best with him, and he seems to be doing marginally better. Minor updates. He's self-harmed again. He had his first therapy session. He made a friend, and I found his somewhat disturbing self-harm related fanfiction. So, I guess I'll start with the therapy session. The therapist had me sit in an office with her and explain the kid's situation to her, and ask some questions about his use, his social issues, my previous relationships with him, etc., and what I wanted out of this. Then he got 15 minutes alone with the therapist and came out looking like he was holding back tears, and then we had 15 minutes of talking together. During it, I had the opportunity to tell him I was sorry for not asking questions sooner when I was already having thoughts like, did that kid ever smile? And whatnot years ago. He held himself together while we were there and said it was okay, but he ran to his room the second we got home. I tried to check on him, and he said that he hates me and that he wants to see his mom. I told him I was sorry he felt that way, but his mom isn't fit to be around him, and then I went out drinking. Not because of him, it had been my plan beforehand. I've never been to therapy, so I don't know if that's how it's supposed to go or not. I guess it broke some kind of emotional dam in him or something. The next day, things were back to normal between us. I asked him if he wanted to keep going to therapy once a week, and he said yes. He has another session tonight. I hope it ends differently. I've heard that if you tell a child's therapist that they're self-harming, it overrides confidentiality, and they will tell you everything that they tell you. Is this true? More knowledge can only be a good thing. Also, I think I'm going to ask about the right way to acknowledge that I should have either left my wife or treated him as my son from the get-go. It's been difficult for me to acknowledge it, even to myself, and I think admitting it partially last week was a mistake. Maybe that's why he got mad, because I was half apologizing. The good news is that he made a friend. It's a boy 3 years older than him in his robotics club. He went over to the boy's house for dinner. He didn't feel like telling me anything about the boy, but he said it went well. I'm accepting that he's just not much of a talker in general, unless it's about something he's excited about. He did seem excited to see him at the club again though, and that warms my heart. There isn't much I can say about the self-harm, detail-wise, though it was obviously very distressing. He's comfortable enough with me to wear short sleeves, as he still wears long sleeves in public though, and he has a new scar. It's bigger than the other ones. That isn't great. I did some light probing like how was your day? You can talk to me if something's going on, etc. And got nothing from him. I found his fanfiction 2 nights ago. He left a few tabs open by accident, and the word self-harm caught my eye on one of them. It was part of the title, and so I switched onto it and saw that he was logged onto some website as the author of an 800-ish word story that was posted on the 15th. I read it because of the title. The main character, a teenager named Cyrus Akagi, is trying to resist the urge to commit self-harm. It's mostly just contemplation while the character does various hobbies because he can't sleep and wants to distract himself, up until the end. Cyrus is a driven, brilliant, and confident young man who wants to do great things and make his ancestors proud, but he's also friendless, his parents hate him, and he's lonely and miserable. He's been trying to learn how to repress all his emotions for a few years, but he can't always manage it, and he has self-harm scars that he's deeply ashamed of because they represent times he lost control. Cyrus nearly hangs himself, but a ghost of his great-great-grandmother, Celine, appears and tells him to stop because he's destined for great things. Cyrus asks her if people will finally love him then, and Celine tells him that he will be adored and respected by many, but he won't get anything out of it. He will succeed in shutting off his emotions, and then he won't feel emotional pain anymore. The story ends on the line, "Keep pushing. You'll get there," from Celine. I looked up the character, and it's the villain of a video game. He's an adult in the games and the leader of a criminal organization that wants to destroy the universe. People like villains, that doesn't bother me. It's the emotional repression and self-harm stuff that's a bit worrisome, since the character is obviously a representation of him. Or maybe I'm being silly. Creating or consuming angsty stuff is the most quintessential adolescent thing there is, after all. The only other thing I can mention is that I finally called my daughters and told them about the situation. I didn't give them any details. I just told them he was having a bit of a mental health crisis. They were sympathetic. I don't know where I'm going with any of this. You wanted an update, and here it is. Teenagers are hard. My girls were hard too, but not this hard. Any thoughts? Update hash. How do you help a 13-year-old boy who's worried about going back to school? So, my son has had a pretty rough life. You can look through my post history if you want, but the Spark Notes version is that his mother was his primary caretaker for his entire life up until I found out she was emotionally abusing him 2 months ago. I was extremely distant from him myself. My wife and I were basically roommates at that point, and he isn't biologically mine, so we both treated him as though he was her responsibility. Yes, it was a mistake, so I'm not blameless in this. He also had no friends, was being bullied at school, was self-harming, and probably had self-harming thoughts. After I found out about all that, I divorced his mother, took custody of him, and got him into therapy and also a robotics club so he could meet friends. He's doing a fair bit better now. He met a friend at a robotics club. He's warmed up to me. And I brought his half-sister into his life as well. He's starting high school in the fall. I let him decide which school to go to, and he chose the one where most of his schoolmates from elementary wouldn't be attending. He talked to me about it, and he said that he isn't sure if he should attempt to be more social at the new school, or if he should just keep his head down and hope he isn't noticed, since he doesn't have a lot of hope that he'll be liked. He's also not sure whether he should openly hang out with his friend or not, since hanging out with a special ed kid might put a target on his back. After expressing that, he got kind of rambly and incoherent and started saying some stuff about how no matter what happened, he would survive it. He didn't need anyone to like him, at least his mother was gone, and he wouldn't let anyone hurt him. There is a lot of I want to survive and thrive in spite of others in him. At the end of our talk, he asked for his sister's phone number so he could ask advice from someone who's younger than me and has at least been in high school in the last decade. I'd just like to say that this is actually a huge improvement over how he was a month ago, for 5 reasons. 1. He's showing an interest in being more social. Even if he's not confident, it'll work out. At first, he outright refused to talk to others in his robotics club because he was trying to convince himself he didn't want or need friends. Many Redditors have suggested that this is a coping mechanism for not having had many friends over the years. 2. He came to me to talk about it. 3. He's glad his mother is gone. He wanted her back at first, and she wanted nothing to do with him. It also suggests that he knows her behavior was wrong. In context, I think he was saying, even if I'm picked on like I was in elementary school, at least I won't be coming home to more hostility. 4. He has his sister to reach out to when he needs the support of a younger person. Honestly, between me, his friend, his sister, and his counselor, he probably has more support now than he's ever had in his life. 5. It seems like a very normal problem for a 13-year-old to have. He's worried about how he'll fit in at high school. Maybe he's more scared than most, but still, this is what 13-year-olds should be worried about. Also, he's leaning towards openly hanging out with his friend. It's nice to know he has some loyalty. Is there anything I should be doing to help him? I told him during our talk that he can come to me if he's being bullied, and we can work something out. Either we could figure out how he could handle it on his own. I could contact the school. If and only if that's what he decides. I don't want to humiliate him, and if need be, he could even change schools since there are 3 different high schools in town. I didn't mention it, but I'm also looking into the pre-ed program for him, which his sister also took. That way, he'll be with the same kids in most of his classes. He's very academically talented, so I'm sure he could take it. Thank you for watching the video.